As we move into our final sections, we're going to talk about decolonization, or the process where countries were able to gain their independence after World War II, and then also the modern global world. We're going to talk about globalization, the way that conflicts are now fought, and the growth of technology. So decolonization, we're going to split it up into different areas, but we're going to focus on India in this video lecture. So two nationalist groups had formed in India. And if we think back all the way throughout Indian history, there had kind of been this conflict where India had been divided between different princes. And then when the Muslim community came in, they took over, they established the Delhi Sultanate. That eventually is going to fall, and then we're going to see the rise eventually of the Mughal Empire. And the Mughal Empire is going to be conquered by the British. Gradually, it is a process where they are able to establish control. You do see that southern regions are still going to maintain a level of autonomy, but the British will increase control, especially after the Sepoy Mutiny in 1857. So there are going to be two nationalist groups that form in India as a response to this lack of autonomy or independence. One is going to be the Indian National Congress, which was formed in 1885, and it's going to house both the Hindu population and the Muslim League together, or the Muslim population together. They are going to be supportive of trying to champion like civil liberties for Indians, and they have initially kind of a range of issues, but eventually it's going to be focused on that independence. What we will see is that the Muslim League is going to be founded later. The leading figure for the Muslim League is going to be Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and he is going to argue that there needs to be a separation of Muslims from the Indian National Congress. The end of World War I, and really World War II as well, is going to bring a lot of disillusionment to the Indian population, because the expectation was now we can kind of see what conflict the Europeans have engaged in. And World War I especially, we've talked about how it really wasn't fought for good reason, right? Like it was a stalemate in the West. And then we know that it ends with this continued blame placed on Germany. So the Indians had been forced to fight in this conflict on behalf of the British because they were a colony, and become very disillusioned. And, we fought for you. A, now we can kind of see that you're not invincible. And B, we want our independence. Like, we helped you become successful in this conflict. We deserve more rights. But the British are actually going to enact a couple of measures to actually decrease the civil liberties of Indians. One of those are the Rowlatt Acts, and it was named after a British individual. And basically, these acts allowed the British to arrest Indians. They could jail them without a trial for up to 2 years. So you could be arrested and not be told of your charges. You could arrest without reason. And you could also have a trial without a jury. So for many Indians who had been educated in these ideas of democracy associated with Britain, this becomes very frustrating for them. They can recognize that their rights are being challenged. And so in Amritsar, you're going to see that there is a group of Indians that come together, about 10,000 Indians, and their goal is that they're just going to fast and they're going to pray, and there's kind of these rituals, and many Indians had not realized at that point that the British had actually outlawed public meetings. And so when the British troops pull up on this meeting, not pull up, but they come up on this meeting in Amritsar, they're going to fire into the crowd. And it lasts for a little over 10 minutes. And they just kill the Indians that had been meeting in this nonviolent, peaceful protest. About 400 Indians are going to be killed. And this information, it gets out there, and this helps to unify the movement, because while there have been some Indians who were supportive of the British government, this is going to completely kind of change that understanding and lead to this desperation to gain independence and separate themselves from British tyranny. And we see the rise of Mohandas Gandhi. And so he is a Hindu, but he blends different ideas from the different religions He's going to use Buddhism and Christianity and Islam, and he is going to be renamed by his followers Mahatma Gandhi, which means the great soul. And he focuses on civil disobedience and nonviolence. He's going to really kind of target the actions of the British government that are considered unjust. He encourages people to not buy goods from the British, to not attend the government schools. He himself had actually been able to attend those government schools and had actually gone to South Africa, which is where he also kind of developed this movement for independence for the Indian population. And then he also encourages Indians to not pay their taxes and to not vote in certain elections. And so he does not want individuals to riot. You are going to see that rioting is common, but that's not something that he himself tried to associate himself with. So one of the big things that he does is he is going to support various boycotts. One that he is going to champion is the boycotting of British cloth. So he would actually weave his own cloth every day for multiple hours in a day. He encouraged the Indians to do the same. And we are going to see that he's successful. And the British become more and more threatened or more alarmed because their profit, their revenue is going down. And that's why the boycott is so effective for that. Then we're going to see that he leads the Salt March because there had been salt acts that had been passed by the British that said the Indians were only able to buy salt from the government, and it was also going to have an additional tax. So Gandhi and several of his followers go on this Salt March. They travel about over 200 miles to the sea, and they're going to make their own salt. This leads to major demonstrations across India, not just with those that are right next to in proximity to Gandhi, but throughout the subcontinent. And over 60,000 people are going to be arrested because of these boycotts, because of these demonstrations. But we're seeing this willingness of non-cooperation and a willingness to kind of challenge what was going on with the British government. So we start seeing this movement, slow movement towards freedom. The government of India is passed in 1935. This is going to allow the Indians to have local self-government, some limited elections. So we're seeing they have more rights. They do not have complete autonomy at this point, but we're seeing that the British are relinquishing some of those rights and some of those powers. World War II is then going to further exacerbate the conflict in India, and we see a growing movement that divides Indians between the Congress parties, the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League, and they're not willing to work with each other in ways that they had previously been willing to work with each other. And the British had kind of set the stage for this when they had divided, they had partitioned India well before that period of time. So they kind of recognized that in their own. So in 1946, you're going to see that some riots, some clashes break out between the Hindu and the Muslim population. Over 5,000 people are going to be killed in this. And so the British at that point recognized that they have to partition or separate it into two nations, that there's not going to be an ability to combine the nations together and have it as a united front. And so on July 16th, 1947, we are going to see the independent states of Pakistan and India are created. One thing I do want you to note, Pakistan is going to have two locations. So you have East Pakistan and then you have West Pakistan. And then you have India. And the Kashmir province that's pictured right here is also going to be very, very important. So the ruler of the Kashmir is going to be a Hindu, but the majority of people living in the region are actually Muslim. And so this is going to lead to frequent clashes. They still have clashes over this region today, very significant. The United Nations stepped in by 1949 to kind of push for a ceasefire. But there's still arguments over that region today. There's that religious divide. So modern India is going to have a couple of significant leaders. Jawaharlal Nehru is going to become the first prime minister, actually rules for about 17 years, promotes industrialization, promotes modernization, does promote the manufacturing industries, wants to support democracy and economic growth. Social reforms are going to be huge for him. So he is actually going to try and elevate or get rid of the lower caste system and improve the social class system in India. He attempts to give women more rights as well. But we're going to see that he's not widely successful or as successful as he desired to be. He's going to die in 1964, and by 1966, they're going to choose his daughter, Indira Gandhi, to kind of rule over and replace him as leader. But at this point in time, we're seeing that there are still clashes, religious clashes within the country. The Sikh population wanted an independent state. And so as these clashes become more and more violent and aggressive, in 1984, some Hindus are going to attack the Golden Temple, which was a religious site for the Sikh population. And that attack will lead into the assassination of Indira Gandhi. So 21st century challenges, we are seeing this massive population growth in India. It's going to have one of the largest populations as the world kind of continues on. So how do we handle that? What do we do? And continued conflict with Pakistan as well next year, because they both are going to start testing nuclear weapons, kind of threatening one another with those. So Pakistan is going to be engaged in its own civil war. If you think back to that map I previously showed you, you had the East and the West. While there are more individuals living in the East, the West is where the government was. And so this is going to cause some conflicts. Individuals living in the East did not feel like they were receiving adequate representation. In 1970, this massive cyclone is going to cause damage to the area. It kills over 200,000 residents. And the government in the West is not going to provide as much support to the East. And so this kind of leads into a bigger conflict, a civil war in Pakistan, eventually leading to the development of Bangladesh as its own independent nation. We are going to see that the region is going to constantly have to deal with terrible environmental issues, whether it's floods. They are primarily agricultural-based community. So when there is damage done to the environment, it is going to drastically impact the region. We also know in 2011 that there was a connection between Pakistan and Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden had been the individual who launched the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001. While the Pakistani government claimed that they did not house him, they did not have any association with Osama bin Laden, he was in fact caught in Pakistan and executed. And then the last thing, Bangladesh, after the Pakistani Civil War, is going to be considered one of the poorest nations in the world. Per capita income is about $360 a year. So we're seeing that very negative effect over the region and the impact that colonization had on religious strife, on ethnic conflict, and then the conflict that continued as the years progressed.